Hello, my name is Mr. Dowling. This is a pile of junk behind me, and today I want to talk to you about English A Paper 1. I am a teacher of English A. I am also an examiner for Paper 1, and I would just like to share with you some of the ideas that I have formulated over the last couple of years in regards to this paper. I'm going to break it down criterion by criterion. So let's begin with criterion A. For A, there are 4 things that I would like you to remember. First of all, textual understanding. Secondly, conceptual understanding. Thirdly, prove to the examiner that you have actually read the text. And finally, please try to include advanced ideas. Let's unpack all of this a little bit more. We should begin by talking about textual understanding. This is quite basic, but it is absolutely fundamental to any success that you hope to achieve in regards to paper 1. When you look at the text, please read it continuously. By continuous reading, I am referring to the process of reading normally. So just read the text as you would read a newspaper or read a book in your own time. By doing this, you will develop an understanding of the text in its own right. After reading it once, you can look at the guiding question, the GQ, and then continuously read the text again with the GQ in mind. At the end of this process, you should have a good understanding and you should be able to answer the question, what is the gist of this text? What is it all about? That is textual understanding. We now need to talk about conceptual understanding. This is the next level of understanding. I think you can achieve conceptual understanding by quite simply asking yourself, what is the path of the text? What is the PAF? Purpose, audience, form. In terms of purpose, ask yourself, what is the agenda? What is this text trying to do? In terms of audience, ask yourself, who is the intended reader or viewer? And for form, think about the text type, advertisement, article, blog, etc. By doing all of this, you'll have a much better understanding of the text. Please don't write a whole page about this. You can do it quite quickly. You can cover it quite quickly in your introduction. I will give you an example later. Next, we need to prove to the examiner that we have actually read the text. Now, this might seem quite basic, but you'll be surprised how many people don't actually prove to the examiner that they have read the text. How can you prove to the examiner that you have read the text? What evidence can you give them? Well, that's quite simple. You need to refer to the text as much as you possibly can. Make frequent references to the text. Obviously, you should be prioritizing your own ideas, but throughout your analysis, please make references to the text. It's best to provide appropriate, relevant, short and succinct quotations. We don't want quotes that are 2 lines long. Quotes that are 2-3 words are perfect. Another thing you can do is maybe include line references. I have seen that done before as well. And finally, for Criterion A, you need to think about advanced ideas. The best way to do this is to build up a bank of advanced ideas throughout the duration of your course. Maybe borrow some ideas from some of your other IB subjects. TOK in particular can be quite helpful. But to really provide some perceptive interpretations of the text, I think it's really useful to integrate some advanced ideas. And I'll give you an example of how this works. Here is an advertisement from Nike. Have you hugged your foot today? Well, if you know something about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, maybe you could talk a little bit about how this text capitalizes on the safety needs of the potential customer. The love and belonging of the potential customer by referring to hugged. So what they are doing, Nike, is they are subtly manipulating the needs of the viewer. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs helps us to better understand how this works. So if you have ideas like this, try and integrate them into your work. I'm trying to make this whole thing a little bit more interactive so it doesn't bore you too much. I have some questions for you. Now, if you're watching this video at home alone, feel free to just think about these questions as they pop up. Maybe you might want to pause and think a little bit further, or you could be watching this video as a class. Maybe your teacher might like to stop at the appropriate points and conduct a little bit of discussion. So, question number 1 about what I have just talked about. We have this. How many times do you think you should read a text before you understand it? Number 2. What does PAF stand for? Number 3. How can we prove to the examiner that we have definitely read the text? And 4. Find a paper 1 text and see if you can connect it to an advanced idea from one of your other IB subjects. That one might take a little bit more time. Off you go. Good luck. I now want to move on to Criterion B. This is an important criterion. You very rarely see students get 5 out of 5 for Criterion B. Also, it seems to be a criterion where lots of capable students fall short. That's because certain students neglect to appreciate the analytical nature of paper 1. Indeed, language and literature has analysis at its core. If you try and do language and literature without conducting analysis, that's the same as trying to study science without ever conducting an experiment or following the scientific method. This is at the heart of what we do as language and literature students, so please make sure that you don't forget about it in the exam. In order to make sure you are successful in regards to this criterion, please make sure that you do 4 things. 1. Know your devices. 2. Choose the best devices at the best times. 3. Write a lot about a little. And 4. Make sure you conduct evaluation. Let's explore further. Okay, to be successful for Criterion B, it is absolutely vital that we know our language and visual devices.
It's by knowing these devices that we are able to analyse and evaluate the writers or producers' authorial choices. So make sure you have a bank of devices, a glossary of devices that you revise and study. I've just included some examples here. So language devices, similes, metaphors, personification, alliteration, emotive language, triples, rhetorical questions, visual devices, images, colour, foreground, background, text type and font, tables, charts and diagrams, headings, subtitles. These are quite basic. I'm sure you have many more advanced devices in your arsenal. Just to make sure you revise them ahead of the exam and you are ready to incorporate them into your work. Having said that, it's all well and good knowing these devices, but what we need to do in the exam is make sure that we write about the best devices. So let me give you an example to illustrate what I'm trying to say here. Here is a little paragraph. Let's imagine that is in a paper 1 passage. You wouldn't write about what I have underlined here. Her brothers would run for cover. There's certainly something you could say about that, but there are other language devices in this paragraph that are much more worthy of your attention, notably feisty little ball of flames and like a hurricane, a metaphor and a simile respectively. I think you could write much more about devices like that and subsequently impress the examiner with your analytical skills. This is my advice. If you are confronted with a language-based text, please prioritise the imagery, similes, metaphors, personification. In a visual text, prioritise the image, the main image that you see. You then need to actually conduct your analysis. So, what I would say to you, my biggest piece of advice here is write a lot about a little. And what I have provided for you here is what I like to call a waggle, what a good one looks like. So you have a paragraph that demonstrates how you can identify the technique and then perhaps write about it in detail. You've got here point, you have also got evidence, effect, impact. You might think about key paragraphs, point, evidence, explanation. I'm sure you've got lots of strategies in your toolkit that help you to develop your analysis. Another thing you could do is just keep asking yourself how and why. Maybe take your quote and then see if you can ask yourself how and why at least 3 times. That can help extend your analysis. But if you do not conduct analysis, you are not going to do well in paper 1. That should be one of the main skills that you are demonstrating in this work. The last thing I want to say about Criterion B is that it's not just analysis, it's actually analysis and evaluation. And quite often we neglect evaluation. Evaluation is when we weigh up the strengths and weaknesses of something. Now, this might be easier to do in something like business management, where we are weighing up the strengths and weaknesses of a certain business practice. It feels a bit hard to do it in language and literature. However, I think it can be done by asking yourself questions like the ones that I have here on the screen. So to what extent are the authorial choices effective? To what extent is the overall text successful in regards to achieving its aims? Could the text be criticised in any way? You might want to add a note of evaluation at the end of your conclusion. It would be much better if you could interweave your evaluation into your overall response, into your main body paragraphs.
Criterion B questions. List 3 language devices, and 3 visual devices. Which device should you prioritise first when conducting your analysis? Multiple choice question this. Noun, repetition, personification. In theory, which one should you prioritise? Next one. Describe one method for extending your analysis. I mentioned a couple. Can you remember one of them? And the last one here. Give an example of a question that we can ask ourselves when trying to evaluate. We're moving on now to Criterion C. This is all about focus and organisation. This one can be quite simple as long as you follow some basic rules. What are those rules? Well, I would like to break it down into 4 points. The first one is that you need to make sure you are focused on the guiding question. Secondly, you need to make sure you have an introduction and a conclusion. Thirdly, you could make use of mini introductions and mini conclusions. And the final point I want to make in regards to Criterion C is that you need to aim for cohesion, and you can do that by including connectives. Let's find out more.
So Criterion C is all about focus and organisation. Let's focus on focus to begin with. What do we need to focus on? Well, obviously we need to focus on the text, but we also need to focus on the guiding question. If we don't focus on the guiding question, then we are going to lose a lot of marks. To make sure that we are focusing on the guiding question and we are doing exactly what the guiding question is asking us to do, it is imperative that you break it down, you deconstruct the guiding question. So here is an example for you. How is the narrative structure used to explore ideas about identity? Well, narrative structure is important here. Identity is important here. In terms of the authorial choices, I need to be focusing on narrative structure, nothing else. And in terms of the ideas, the themes that I am interpreting, making comments on, they all must relate to identity. If I talked about anything else, it would be inappropriate. It would not be focused. There is another question here. How do text and image work together to shape meaning in this comic strip? I think the phrase work together is important here. We're not just talking about text and image in isolation. We need to talk about how they work together. If you don't break down the question, there is a danger that you might miss a crucial part of what the question is asking you to do. Let's move on now to the organisation of your work. Well, if you're going to be organising your essay effectively, it's quite obvious that it should begin with an introduction and a conclusion. You don't need to spend copious amounts of time writing your introduction and your conclusion, but you do need to make sure they are there and they are effective. And what I've tried to do here is offer some example introductions and conclusions, just to give you a glimpse of how short and sweet it can actually be. So the introduction. Text A is an advertisement that uses various visual techniques in order to persuade the viewer to buy the product. Notice how I am covering the whole of purpose, audience and form in that one sentence. I don't need to write a page about that. This essay will show how the heading captivates the viewer, the primary image forges an emotional connection, and the secondary image helps to seal the deal. So what I'm doing here is I am listing in chronological order what I am then going on to explain in further detail. And the model conclusion. Ultimately, what I'm doing here is just summing up what I have written in my essay. In conclusion, and I would advise you to always start with that connective. I don't think there's any reason to be creative there. Just start all your conclusions with in conclusion. In conclusion, this essay has shown how text A employs headings and images so that the viewer is persuaded to buy the product. On the whole, it could be said that this is an effective text because it achieves its aims of making the viewer think about the product in a way that might lead to them going out to buy it. What I've tried to show you there is how you could add a little bit of evaluation to the end of your conclusion. So introductions, conclusions, make sure they are there in your essay. As well as your overall introductions and conclusions, you might want to think about mini introductions and mini conclusions for your main body paragraphs or your main body sections, and these can be quite effective. So let's imagine we're starting a point. We might begin with, first of all, the producer of this text persuades the viewer to buy the product by featuring an unusual heading that is immediately captivating. So this is almost like a topic sentence where I am making it crystal clear to the examiner what my point is going to be about. Notice how I have addressed the question, how I have identified a language technique, and how I have linked that to some kind of effect. So it's not, first of all, the producer of this text uses headings. It's much more sophisticated than that, but still, it's not incredibly long. Mini conclusion. This is important, I think, because it helps to link all of your ideas back to the guiding question. And if we digress a little, maybe we can tie our ideas back together and still make them relevant to the GQ. So here is an example. Overall, it is abundantly clear that this heading helps the text to achieve its aim of persuading the viewer. And now let's talk about cohesion. We need to make sure that our work is not just focused and organised, but it flows. And the best way we can do this is by including connectives. And you have lots of examples of connectives here on the screen in front of you. I would strongly advise you to start each paragraph, apart from the introduction, with some kind of connective. When the IB examiner reads your work, one of the questions they will ask themselves is whether they could swap these paragraphs around. If they could swap your paragraphs around, you will lose marks because it shows that your organisation, your cohesion is not up to scratch. By using connectives, you are making it clear to the examiner that you know exactly how you want your work to be organised. Paragraph X cannot be switched with paragraph Y because the connective will not allow it.
Have you been listening? I hope that you have, because now we have some questions for Criterion C. So, question number 1. Why is it important that we break down the guiding question? Question number 2. What are some tips for writing effective paper 1 introductions and conclusions? 3. What are the potential benefits of including mini introductions and mini conclusions? Number 4. List 5 possible connectives that we can use when starting a new paragraph. And that's it, we're nearly there. We just need to look at Criterion D. Criterion D is all about language, how you use language. We just need to make sure that we write well. We should all be capable of doing that. To get top marks, we need to show the examiner that we can write very well. And we can do that by proofreading our work, including advanced vocabulary, including advanced punctuation, and also adopting a suitable tone voice register in our work. For the final time today, let's find out more.
Here we go. This one goes without saying. You need to proofread. Proofread for accuracy, spelling and grammar. No one is too good to proofread. Some people might forget to proofread, but don't worry, I have developed a threefold approach to make sure that you don't forget and to make sure your proofreading is as effective as it possibly can be. I advise you to proofread at the end of every sentence that you write. So you write your sentence, you put a full stop, read that sentence again. Then proofread at the end of every paragraph and proofread at the end of the entire essay. If you proofread like this, I think you will find that you eliminate most of your mistakes. Okay, vocabulary. It's important to include advanced vocabulary. Now, that's easier said than done. And unless you have an extensive vocabulary already, you might think it's hard to do this. I think we're all capable of doing it. We just need a different approach. So, first of all, include advanced words you know, big words you know. But also make sure you're including technical vocabulary, your knowledge of linguistic techniques, language devices, visual devices. That also is an example of advanced vocabulary. You could include vocabulary related to those advanced ideas that I talked about in Criterion A. And you could maybe find out about tone. This is something that comes up quite a lot in paper 1. Find out about tone and just go on the internet and type in adjectives to describe tone. You'll find lots of websites where they've compiled maybe 150 words that you can use in relation to tone. Make sure you know them all and you can maybe integrate them into your essay and sound impressive. Okay, advanced punctuation. We've already talked about advanced vocabulary. This is now advanced punctuation. There's nothing in the mark scheme, the assessment criteria, saying that you must do this. But as an examiner, subjectively, it does impress me when I see students use advanced punctuation correctly. What kind of advanced punctuation am I referring to? I'm talking about colons and semicolons, and maybe to a lesser extent brackets, parentheses. If you can include these in your work correctly, it will certainly impress the examiner. Indeed, it could be argued that by including advanced vocabulary and advanced punctuation, you are developing an advanced tone, register, voice, and that is mentioned in the mark scheme. So I'd just like to extend on this a little bit. If we want to make sure that we have an appropriate tone, register, voice, there are some things that we should not do and some things we should do. Let's talk about the things we should avoid. Avoid referring to the writer by their first name. You are not their friend. Use their full name or use their surname or just say the writer. Avoid using digits for numbers that can be easily written. So don't say that the writer includes 2 and write the number 2 visual techniques. You could easily write the writer includes 2 TWO visual techniques. Avoid informal language, slang. Avoid contractions. So you could argue that words like don't, can't, won't those are quite informal. So I would say avoid contractions like that in your work. And personally, I mean, some of these are quite personal, actually. It's just some advice for you. And the next one is personal. Personally, I think in an essay, you shouldn't be offering rhetorical questions. Your job is to provide the answers. So those things could work against you when it comes to tone, register, voice. What we should be aiming for is a lucid response to the question where it's clear that we know what we are talking about. It should be mature, it should be sophisticated, and it should almost feel as though it's written by an expert.
Final set of questions. Let's go. So, Criterion D. What can we do to make sure that we do not forget to proofread our work? Number 2, provide one type of advanced vocabulary that we can include in our work. 3, what are the rules for using colons and semicolons? That's a hard one. And 4, what kind of voice register tone should we be aiming for in our essay? And that is it. Those are all of the questions. I've been through each of the criterion. Criteria. I wish I was an English A teacher. So hopefully you have found this video useful. Keep revising, keep studying, try and remember some of these tips when it comes to the exam. If you liked this video, please physically like the video, subscribe, and who knows, one day I might become famous and I might be able to afford a microphone. Let's see, we can only hope. But anyway, thank you so much, good luck, take care, goodbye.